Welcome back, guys, to the Beyond Condition podcast. Today is the 100th episode of the podcast, and what an episode to launch for this celebration, of course. Now, when starting out the podcast, it was certainly to inspire and empower the bodybuilding community. And I feel like it's such a great time to have that reflection of how far the podcast has come and the education and empowerment I'm able to give you guys. Now, today's episode is going to be centered around a talking point, a communication point for you guys that are in prep or about to embark on this journey. And it's going to offer you that tool to express what a prep is for those around you. Now, if you've never done a prep before, or perhaps you've started a new relationship, whether that be with a partner or a friend, it's sometimes quite hard to quantify in words what this lifestyle involves, right? And actually, it was definitely something I reflected on that could be very, very useful to pass on to people around you rather than you trying to communicate it fully. And hopefully, I'm going to discuss plenty of things that maybe you haven't even thought about that those around you will value. So I guess the best place to start will be, what is bodybuilding? What is a prep? And on the face of it, when you consider what you're trying to achieve in a prep, of course, it's to get to a physique that you can present on stage. But what does that actually mean? What does that look like? And how do you describe that? And I often liken it to, if you've been or seen somebody else do a diet, it's then that next level. And it is, well, it can be quite a dramatic change and new level that people around you maybe never have seen before. Because in a conventional diet, generally you're getting to a point where you feel pretty comfortable. You feel like you look good. You've maybe got an aspiration of a certain size that you'd like to fit into. And potentially the goal is a holiday or a wedding, something like this. Now, when you then look at a bodybuilding prep, that is geared towards a show. Now, there's certainly relevance around what federation and what criteria you are entering, because the different criteria and federations will ask for a different level of condition. So condition is essentially how lean you are and how much you need to diet. And that will depict on actually how, I guess, dramatic the diet comes across as, how lean you're going to get. Because, of course, if you're listening to this and someone you know is going into a prep, you're going to see that person really change and transform their body to, like I say, a level that you maybe would have never seen before. And another reason for doing this podcast is that can actually be quite scary from people looking in from the outside. And I certainly know from my own experience of competing, and I competed for 10 years, that the first prep I did, or even the first few, particularly my mum, it was very hard for her to watch me almost disappear because I was pushing for a very lean physique. And to try and communicate what I was doing and what I was trying to achieve, from going from a normal lifestyle, I did triathlon, so I was doing some working out, I was, I guess, an average size. For my mum to then witness me getting very, very lean, it was quite a scary process for her. She was very worried. Of course, there's monitoring of nutrition, of training, and many other vectors that go into this lifestyle, into a prep. And I certainly found that there was a strong emphasis on a tunnel vision that I'd never really unlocked before. And I was incredibly focused. And what you may find if you see someone go through a prep is that tunnel vision becomes very intrinsic. So it's quite hard to then communicate with those around you what you're doing, because of course you're pushing in a diet phase. So if we relate this back to what a normal diet would feel like, would look like, generally you get to a point where your food is going to be lower. Potentially you're doing the gym and that may increase. You may do more steps, things like this. And towards the end, you can feel it's much harder than when you, of course, began. Now, what I then want you to think about is, if you are dieting for a certain date, so like a holiday or a wedding, like I mentioned, when you get to that point, you're so close to that, it feels far away, you get very close, and then you're really excited, and that adrenaline almost takes over for a lot of us. And that's very, very similar to a prep. That tunnel vision that unlocks is down to the person that's in the prep is going to be stepping on stage, bearing all. It's what I would describe as exposing yourself fully. There's rarely, I guess, opportunities in life or times in life where you're going to be on a stage wearing a bikini if you're a female, or trunks, or whatever outfit it is for whatever category you're in, and you're being judged by a panel of judges. You're under the spotlights, you've got a tan on, all of these things, and there's a crowd there, of course. That is the maximal exposure. So for a lot of people that enter a prep, that is going to be on their mind. And certainly there's merit in trying to almost understand and get your head around that. How would that feel if you'd taken on this challenge, you really want to push yourself, and the end goal is to step on stage in that scenario? And that's pretty daunting, right? So then if you can bring about these thought processes, right, and start to think, okay, so how would that feel for this person? And like I say, it is a big challenge. It's an ultimate goal. And that certainly will help an element of you understanding perhaps how pressured this can be, how hard this can be, particularly if this is someone's first time doing this. The first time is a very precious prep. It's something that you don't forget as a competitor if you pursue this lifestyle. Generally speaking, that goal of stepping on stage for your first time, it fills your whole life, your thought processes. I even found, and I still find now, when I have a competition coming up, I even wake up in the night thinking about it. I dream about it. So you're thinking about this goal constantly. And whatever the reason is for the person going through this prep and embarking on this challenge, that is something I also want to lay relevance on. Having a conversation around what this actually means to them, what they're looking to achieve. There's many, many different reasons why people start this journey, why people look to step on stage. And a lot of them have an emotional attachment. That also adds to the tunnel vision, the focus, and how much the life then becomes the journey to the stage. Because if this is from an element of finding purpose, from potentially having a lack of control in life previously, from maybe being at a point where you're incredibly unhappy with your physique, with your body, you then come across bodybuilding, quite like the look of that. You think, okay, so this could be something that maybe I could try. So then you unleash the elements of control, the elements of purpose, and you start to monitor your nutrition, your training, perhaps your sleep, many, many different things that fall under the physique development umbrella. And it can really genuinely feel like you have found your home, something that means a hell of a lot to you. Because from my experience building up to becoming a bodybuilder, I never really felt like I knew what my direction was. And then I found bodybuilding and it was like, wow, this is me. This is what I want to pursue. And I often liken it to, it's definitely something that gives you a drive like no other, because of course, what you put into a prep, you get a direct reward, I guess we want to call it. So you do your training, you monitor your nutrition, you do your steps, you start to monitor things like sleep, like I've mentioned. So everything you're doing is down to you and down to your effort. And then you start to realize, okay, so I'm getting leaner in a prep, I'm losing body fat, this feels good. And then you start to do things like posing practice, and it may be a new skill to you. It may be something that you never ever dreamt of that you would do. Then suddenly you're doing this, and that empowerment in itself is exactly that. It's empowerment. You find that purpose, like I've mentioned. And this relevance here is super important when you're trying to understand someone's focus in a prep, if you're seeing someone commit to this journey, because it certainly feels like, and I'm talking from personal experience, that your whole life is on the line until that day when you step on stage. And on that day, every, like I say, waking moment, you're thinking about, what do I need to do that is going to get me to the stage in the best possible condition I can be to match the criteria that has been set. Now, when we talk about federations and criteria, it's certainly something that is worth discussing, because what I found throughout my first few seasons of competing is that how can I describe what a stage physique looks like to people around me? So yes, you can communicate that you're going to get leaner, that you're going to try and push for a really lean physique, a new condition that you haven't done before. But if you've never experienced someone even doing a diet, say, what does lean even mean? What does condition mean? What does that actually look like? So something that I'd recommend you doing is either with the person that is embarked on the prep, or potentially yourself. If there has been a federation selected by the athlete, then you can pop onto their website and you can actually look at the different categories and what the federation is looking for. So the federation is who organizes the bodybuilding shows. Now, when you look on the website, there's normally a criteria section. And then if you look up the category, so as an example, I'm in bikini, you can look at bikini. You can see often on most of the websites, there's sometimes even videos, but there is photos of what the athletes look like when they are aiming for a bikini competitor physique. This is very useful because you can actually have a visual point where you go, okay, so this is what the person in prep is aiming to look like. Now, of course, there is different individual responses to a prep. Everyone's physique is different because we are all genetically individual, but it certainly gives you an idea of, okay, so this is the level of leanness that we're looking at. And that's very, very helpful. Now, an extension of that, which can be even more helpful, would be to look at visiting an actual show. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the federation that the athlete is competing in, but you could look at any of the federations and go along to watch a show. This is incredibly valuable because it actually opens up your mind and your world to what a bodybuilding show is. And it's a very, very exciting journey. It's something that can be shared with family members, with friends, with even acquaintances, because it's not often that you see many people around you, unless you're a bodybuilder, that are doing something like this. And it's the ultimate challenge, as I mentioned. So to be part of that, to actually experience what a show looks like, what that would feel like, because essentially it is a performance. You know, a lot of the federations will hire out a really nice venue. It could be a concert hall or something like this. And it is putting on a show. And that's a really nice spot to be at when you're looking to understand what bodybuilding is. Because I remember the first time I went to a bodybuilding show, which actually sparked the intrigue for me to actually compete myself. I looked around and I thought, wow, this is like a whole new world. And it certainly is. It's a very different scenario, a very different setup to what you'd see in normal life. And that's also like a prep. It's not something that many people do. And to actually go along to a show, see what it's about, see how much it means to people when they step on stage, see people cheering in the audience, it starts to build excitement for you to connect with the athlete that is going into a prep and is looking to compete. And it can also help, of course, if you can go together and to connect, for the athlete to feel like you're investing time and effort into their journey. Because when we look at bodybuilding as a whole, I've already mentioned how this becomes a very purposeful journey. It brings a sense of control. It brings a sense of motivation, achievement. That can also be quite a solo journey. So everything you put in as an athlete, you directly get that reward. And that can at times be a bit of a lonely spot, because what happens over a prep is that you are pushing down into body fat levels that you potentially haven't visited before, and that is low body fat levels. And that then it starts to change how you feel energy wise. There's a lot more to do in a day to get towards a stage condition, and that can be a hard spot to be in. So if there's something like a show that you're going to go and watch with the athlete, or there's certain things that you can get involved with, this can add that little bit of sparkle and to hopefully help them feel like they're not alone, which is a very, very strong thing to offer someone. Because when we actually look at what the prep entails, let's break that down a little bit more. So to gather even more understanding. So when the prep is mapped out, is planned out, it's generally for a certain amount of time. So this can be for X amount of weeks, and that can lead to a certain show or multiple shows, or that could be, we're going to start a prep, see how we get on, and then a show is chosen nearer the time. Because it may be that if it's the first time, you're going to start the prep process, see how you go, and then decide the federation you want to compete with. Now, as a general rule of thumb, you're starting your prep in a position where you do have body fat, that you have potentially never done this before. Like I say, you're a first timer. So it does definitely have a big relevance on what your starting point is as to how long this prep will last, and potentially how much effort you need to put in over that time. Now, that starting point will generally be agreed with a coach. Hopefully, the athlete has someone to guide them through this process, of course, because generally speaking, having that education and guidance is key to a successful prep. So you're starting at this point, whatever point that is in regards to your body composition is individual to you. So like I say, there's generally a timeline of how long this prep is going to last. So from a coaching standpoint, and I'm talking from how I operate as a coach, that would then decide how long the prep will last. But it will also decide how much we need to put the athlete in regards to a deficit, that starting point, and how long that deficit will last, where the changes will occur to bring about a larger deficit as we get closer to the show. So when I talk about a deficit, let's get on that deeper level of understanding now. A deficit is essentially based around burning more calories than you're consuming. So how do we create a deficit? Generally speaking, a deficit is from utilizing a calorie deficit, so eating less food, and also increasing expenditure. When we talk about expenditure, that can be from direct cardio, which is things like your gym equipment, so your stationary bike or your cross trainer, or that can be done through steps, and you can monitor that through something like a Fitbit or an Apple Watch. When we look at the food over time, again, generally speaking, that will go lower and lower the closer you get to the stage. So that's how we would look to almost timeline a prep and the bare bones of what a prep entails with a bit of detail there. So when someone starts the prep, generally for the first portion of time, they're still going to have body fat there, and they're still probably going to feel pretty good. They're going to feel motivated for the challenge, the journey to the stage. And actually, you know, it can feel like, okay, so I'm in quite a good spot here. Now, what I want you to think about, if you're experiencing someone going through a prep that is potentially, let's throw some timelines out there, 30 to 40 weeks. Over that period of time, that's a long stretch of time, their food is going to go lower and the expenditure is going to go higher. Now, that then comes with that cost almost of that then gets harder, right? So how does that feel as an athlete to go through that process? Like I mentioned at the start, you're pretty motivated, whether you're competing for the first time or the 10th time. You've got potentially that date in mind, or you know that you're committing to a prep for X amount of time. So you're focused on the stage. Then as the prep goes on, it starts to get harder. So earlier I spoke about if you've done a diet before for maybe a holiday, just before the holiday, you think, okay, that's getting pretty tough. You've got the holiday to look forward to. Okay, this is great. I've got my holiday. I can chill out now. I've completed my diet. But then in a prep, it's far, far beyond that. And that, again, is generally speaking, depending on the category, of course, that I've mentioned already. But really, most of the categories are going to require an element of leanness, of condition, that would be beyond what you would look at as a conventional diet. So as that gets harder, I've mentioned energy levels, but it actually gets a touch harder to communicate that actually this is getting hard. Now, the person that is in the prep, if you're a loved one and they've sent this episode to you, I would imagine that you know them pretty well. So let's start to look at how you would approach this. Because when times are hard in life, whatever challenges you face, when you're mentally fatigued and physically fatigued in a prep, it's very similar to if you face a challenge in life. When you get to the end of the day and you're thinking, wow, I'm feeling pretty rough, I'm feeling low on energy, low on mood, etc. When we think about this in a prep scenario, you're, as the athlete, needing to pretty much find energy day in, day out, particularly at that tail end of your prep. So imagine if you're listening to this and you've had a hard day at work, you've got some home stuff going on, a few issues at home. You've maybe got up early and you've been on the go all day. How do you feel when you get home? Pretty tired, pretty exhausted. If someone was to ask you a question, if someone didn't know what was going on and you wanted to tell them, but would you actually, or would you go, do you know what? I just haven't got the energy. I haven't got the energy. I'm going to keep it to myself. I'm going to go to bed potentially in a bad mood. And you can see how this sort of escalates. Now, when someone is in a prep, and this is lasting, say, 30 to 40 weeks, that could get hard fairly quickly. So like I say, generally at the start, you have body fat, you have energy, you're pretty motivated. But that's not me saying that it might not, you know, it might not feel like that for long. certainly it could feel in a couple of weeks, wow, this is already pretty hard. So then imagine if I play into the 40-week prep, whoa, 38 weeks of potentially feeling like that, what I've just described there, every day, or a lesser version as the prep goes on, that increasing potentially. So when we then look at this from the athlete's standpoint, and you knowing the athlete, how is best to try and communicate and support them? And there is a level of ownership on you. If this is someone you love and care about, and this is very important to them, to potentially think about this a bit more, explore this a bit more, rather than ask them too many questions, potentially start to think about them as a person. What I've already described is going to happen. How can I maybe do something that will make them feel good or know that they're supported? And, you know, for me, when I look back and I reflect on this, in a prep when things are very, very tough, it is, like I say, a very solo journey. But even when you see a letter on the side saying, I love you, you've got this, it's an extremely nice thing to see, because it knows, it guides you. You know that you're not alone and there are people that care about you, that support you. And I don't generally think that you need to know the ins and outs of everything to be able to support someone embarking on this challenge. I feel like it's more relevance on how much does this person mean to you, and do I want to support them? Do I want to empower them? How can I do that in the best way possible? And if that is your sole focus, and if you can relate to them to a certain degree, I'd like to think that that will come across in the best way. And I like to think that that will offer them potentially a little bit of added strength and support during this time. When we look at this being a first timer, if this is your first time doing a prep, it's a whole new level for a lot of us. It's actually, although you know potentially what it's going to entail, it's not till you live it day in, day out that you realize, okay, this is a pretty big thing. This is, like I say, every single waking moment you're thinking about it. And there is then that discovery of, okay, so I say, if you notice how important this is to someone, why is it important to them? Do you know why they're doing this? Or is it just that they've said, I'm going to try this, I'm going to see how it goes? Or could you maybe, before the prep starts and they sow the seed, they talk about that they're going to embark on this journey, could there be a conversation that's potentially started by you, if maybe they've got that locked in their mind and they're potentially not communicating it fully to you? Could you ask them, you know, why are you doing this? What does it mean to you? Framing that is certainly individual to the person. So by no means am I saying, just say, well, why are you even doing this? But more of an emphasis on, that's a really cool thing that you're going to do. I'd love to understand it more. I'd love to understand why you want to do this, because it will help me see what this means to you and feel what this means to you, and potentially help me to support you more. And that conversation is incredibly valuable, because when you do choose to be a competitive bodybuilder, finding your why and what it is you want to achieve is potentially the strongest part to what you get from this journey, and if you see it through to stage. Because when it gets tough, really tough, understanding why you're doing a bodybuilding prep is a fundamental that I really do feel like should not be overlooked. And there's different coaches out there. There is different ways to look at this. But from my standpoint, as an athlete and a coach, this is a huge part to understanding exactly why you want to compete. So to then have the opportunity to share this with your loved ones and realize the importance of this, and how making that clear can actually add a lot of value to you, and also potentially it can help ease conflict. So conflict is something I also want to talk about on this podcast today, because as we go through a prep, through this dieting phase, like I say, the physique, the appearance changes dramatically, and we can run into conflict. Now, when we look at conflict as a whole, you'll probably have your own version of this. And what it generally means is that you come across someone pushing back on something that you're doing, or an opinion that you have, or a certain way that you act even. And this is something that I talk about on the podcast a lot. It is certainly something we face as competitors, generally speaking. Now, not only are people around you seeing your body change pretty dramatically, but also there is a certain amount of emphasis on, if someone is looking to do a prep and a competition, and there's people around them that A, don't understand it, and B, would like to do that themselves, but they can't right now, or they don't have that strong wires to actually doing that and pushing that much, there's almost elements of jealousy, of that lack of understanding of, well, why are you doing this? And conflict can be taken in many different ways. When I look at my own personal experience with conflict, there's a couple of different scenarios I'm going to run through that can give you examples of how you can support someone that is going through a prep and they do deal with conflict. So when I did my first couple of preps, I worked in a gym. And when in that environment, I automatically thought that everyone would be pretty supportive of what I was doing. And it seemed like, in my mind, I'm trying to do something really good here. I'm trying to challenge myself. I'm pushing myself to compete, which is something I never thought possible. And in my mind, it was like, well, no one would criticize that, because it's amazing what can be done in a prep. And there was a certain amount of naivety there, because when people maybe don't know that you're doing a bodybuilding prep, or they don't really want to know, it's like a passing relationship, like that acquaintance type vibe, that they can make comments very easily that can be taken in the wrong way, or in a way that is detrimental to the athlete. So when I started this journey, I kept things pretty quiet, because one big reason for me was that until I'd done a show, and for me personally, until I'd won a show, I didn't really want to call myself a bodybuilder, because I wanted to, like, I guess, earn the right to call myself a bodybuilder or a competitor. So that didn't help, because I didn't really talk about it in detail to people. So from an outsider's point of view, people were seeing my body dramatically change, dramatically. I got incredibly lean, and I faced quite a few conversations that left me feeling very, very upset, left me feeling targeted. It left me feeling like, why are people being horrible to me? So I'll give you a really good example. One day I was cleaning the gym kit, and there was a guy, a member at the gym, and he actually knew what I was doing. And I was cleaning away, and he was cycling on the bike, and he said to me, "Have you got a food disorder?" That was all he said. We hadn't said hello or anything like this. And I said, "No, I'm doing a bodybuilding prep." And he went, "Well, you're very skinny." And I sort of carried on cleaning for a little bit. And I then went into the toilet and I cried, because I felt very upset. I thought, why is this person saying that to me like they're saying it to me? Why are they being like that? What have I done to deserve someone almost bullying me? And that was really hard. So that type of example is someone not thinking, is someone projecting opinions, and is someone that's not being considerate to what I'm trying to achieve and what that means to me. And it was a very flippant comment. That was tough. And that's one of the memories that stands out to me. Also associated with my time working in the leisure centre that I used to work in, I dealt with a hell of a lot of conflict. Now, when you're a bodybuilder, when you prep or whatever phase you are in, generally you're taking your food to your workplace or out and about with you. You've accounted for that food and you eat out of Tupperware a lot of the time. That in itself can raise intrigue from either people that think it's pretty cool and want to ask you about it, or from people that maybe don't look at their nutrition, but they don't want to. Maybe they've tried before. It's not something that they're looking to invest time into. And that's cool. You know, everyone has their own journey and their own outlook on what they want to do with their life. However, it does raise questions. And throughout my whole time at the leisure centre of being a bodybuilder, so I actually ended up being there for a number of years, 13 years, and a large portion of that I was a bodybuilder. I mentioned earlier that my first couple of seasons was probably the hardest in regards to conflict and being in the workplace, because I wasn't really explaining what I was doing as such, because I had that sort of my own vision on it and not wanting to talk about it too much, just do what I was doing and not communicate that and raise talking points, etc. Because especially in the first time, I hadn't even stepped on stage and I didn't know if I'd even make it. But many comments came my way. And when I talk about it, when I reflect, no joke, pretty much every time I ate from a Tupperware, there was a question or there was a remark. So, what are you eating? Are you eating that again? Oh, that smells. If it was something like, you know, fish and vegetables and I'd heated it up as an example. And let me tell you, it's not helpful. It really is not helpful. Now, there's definitely a difference between intrigue and potentially jealousy or that conflict. If people ask me, oh, wow, that looks really nice, what are you eating? Of course, you know, there's a conversation point there and I felt okay to do that. If people are making remarks, potentially in front of other people as well, it starts to isolate you as an athlete. It starts to make you feel like people are questioning what you're doing. Now, some people are very strong-minded and they can push through this type of conflict. I certainly feel as my time went on as a bodybuilder, I became better at addressing this and remaining true to myself and my goals. However, as I mentioned, that first couple of seasons, it felt like a personal attack. It felt like I was being bullied for trying to do something good. Now, the reason I wanted to give some examples there was because that leads into, if the athlete that has sent you this podcast is sending this to you to help communicate what they're doing, if they potentially come across this conflict and they come home and they're upset, they've been affected by this type of behavior, it's something I would certainly think about how you could support them through this time. Now, from my own personal experience and working with people that embark on this journey, I don't find it helpful when others around me almost get on side with it being negative and making it bigger than it is. So a valuable message that I try and give is that if someone is asking you about what you're eating, what training you're doing, why you need to do X, Y, Z, there's a way to get around this when you feel more comfortable. But also, if you're supporting someone that deals with this, there's certainly merit in actually stripping it back and being a bit more logical rather than leading with emotion. You know what it's like if someone you care about a lot is upset, like my example of going into the toilet crying. If I'd gone home to my mum and said, I've just been in the toilet crying because someone personally attacked me, how would she feel? She'd feel upset. She would probably feel angry, and she would probably want to lash out. And this is potentially a scenario you might find when you're supporting someone who is a bodybuilder. So if you come across this, potentially trying to have a conversation and show empathy towards the athlete, asking them to talk about what happened. And this message, this valuable message that I wanted to share, is for the athlete and for you. Have a think about the person that said this to you. So whether this is someone you know or not, why would they have said what they've said? So have a look at this. Is this because maybe they've done diets before and they've failed their diets? Is this because they're jealous? Is this because it's someone that you don't really get on with and they're trying to get one up on you? Is it someone that's a pretty negative person anyway and they treat a lot of people like this? Try to dissect it a little bit. And also, what I empower is that when you come across this conflict, start to think about what your why is and start to find your own version of how you can deal with conflict from a strong position. Now, like I've already spoken about in this podcast, as the prep goes on, it gets harder and your energy is lower. So that also ties into you can feel much more sensitive to personal attacks. So when you start to dissect what someone said, you're starting to understand who said it, but also actually play back in your mind what they said. Perhaps they didn't mean what you've taken it as. Of course, this goes across all areas of life, right? You come across opinions, you come across people saying things that you can take in the wrong way and they maybe didn't mean that. But it's certainly something to consider for the athlete and the person supporting the athlete. What point of prep you're in will have potentially an effect on how sensitive you are, how you feel that maybe you would blow things out of proportion more because you are depleted, your energy is depleted, you're pushing pretty hard. You're pushing hard. So then we start to consider, okay, so if something happens, if I can lean on people around me, if I can have a conversation with maybe the person that's listening to this podcast and say, this happened today, I feel really upset, and dissect it. See it as a little mission to understand it a bit more and then come to a resolution rather than it becoming heated, you feeling detrimental to yourself, you blowing up, you facilitating anger to those around you. Just try and take a step back and actually look at this a bit more from a rational standpoint, shall we say. Because certainly, as you push through a prep, you can become quite short-tempered and irrational, for sure. And I've already given you reasons why. A very good way to have almost a thought process here to spark a new way of thinking about this. When you look at people in countries of poverty and over time, they don't have access to food, they become, very skinny, they lose muscle mass, they lose energy. When you see that on a TV screen, when you see it on an advert, there's a reason why those adverts are so emotive. You think, oh my God, I really want to help this person. I want to help give them food, give them water. I want to care for them. I want to give them shelter. You might think, what has that got to do with bodybuilding? But essentially, you're seeing someone you care about, an athlete, slowly over time, going through a deficit, getting very low body fat levels that can be viewed as, a very extreme change in their body. It can also look like this person's disappearing in front of your eyes. So although it's a graduated process over those, 20, 30, 40 weeks, however long is decided with the coach, you literally see this person disappear. And that's sometimes quite a good way to think about this. So when we talk about conflict, rather than questioning an athlete, rather than saying you shouldn't be doing this, it's not healthy, it's not this, it's that, how would you treat someone that is, not doesn't have access to food, that is looking like you want to, help them and give them food and give them water? You'd want to do that, you'd want to care for them, but here comes that change in thought processes with this example. When someone is in a bodybuilding prep, you cannot give them food, you cannot try and give them the nourishment from food that is being taken because they're going deeper into a deficit. But what you can do is give them care, is give them safety, is help them mentally by supporting them and not questioning their decision to partake in a prep. And that also ties into when you're supporting someone in a prep, there's certainly an element of consideration. Again, this is very person dependent as to what you eat in front of them, around them. This even goes across to sending videos on something like Instagram, sending pictures of foods that they're not having. That facilitates an element of pressure, of upset, of conflict. It's still viewed as conflict, because whether this is a first timer who has sent you this or someone that's competed several times, when you're in a diet like this, you are hungry most of the time. So when you're sent photos and videos, or when someone is in the house with you where you live and they're eating a takeaway pizza and you can't do that, let's think about that from the point of view of someone that is living with someone in prep. Is that helpful? Now, that's not me saying you can't eat food around someone that's in a bodybuilding prep, because there is a relevance on this being their choice and their challenge and their individual journey. That's not for you to, of course, have to do what they're doing. I'm definitely not saying that. But what I'm saying is there considerations to be had around how you are around the athlete? So if you want to go for a pizza, could you do that separately? Or depending on the athlete, could you have a conversation with them to say, we're going to go out for a meal tonight? Would you still want to come and have, say, a Diet Coke and have your food before? Could we time it around that? Or would you prefer to stay at home and we go out for some food, rather than all sitting there on a Friday night? The athlete is there, they've maybe had most of their meals for the day, and then you order their favorite pizza and sit and eat it in front of them. Again, this depends on the athlete. For me, it doesn't bother me when I'm in a prep, but it did when I first started. Now you can eat whatever you want in front of me in a prep, and that's fine. I would actually take enjoyment out of watching you enjoy the food. But I just want to spark that thought process. This is not me being detrimental to what people want to eat. Everyone, like I said earlier, has their own individual journey and decisions around their food, their body, how they operate, how they live their life. But let's remember, if you care and love this person that is taking on the ultimate challenge, could there be a thought process here to facilitate that? Now, I also feel like it would be very helpful to talk a bit more about the nutrition side of things. So you can pretty much guess that there's going to be weight training involved with a bodybuilding prep. That's what the affiliation is, right? Training in the gym, eating right. But what does eating right mean? Eating right generally aligns with what the person's goal is. So if someone's goal is to step on stage, like I've mentioned, over time, food gets taken, you eat less calories so that you are burning more calories because you're taking less in, and then that creates a huger deficit as you go through the prep. So how does this actually look? Now, generally speaking, most bodybuilders that I know of, and certainly athletes that I coach, are weighing and measuring their food. They may even be looking at meal timings. So they may eat at set times during the day and set quantities of food. Now, this is to deliver them to the stage. This is to deliver them to their goal of getting a stage physique. So there's different ways to look at this. Some coaches will provide a meal plan, and that's set. So as an example, you've got 5 meals over a day. Each of those meals has X amount of different foods in that meal. And it might be that you eat 5 times throughout that day, and that's separated by X amount of hours between those meals, potentially around the workout, before bed. There's different things that coaches look at to facilitate the meal plan idea. There's also a flexible dieting approach. You may have heard of it. MyFitnessPal is a food tracking app, and that is an app where the athlete would be set targets for their calories, and they make up their daily food by scanning foods into the app or searching foods on the app. So if you don't know anything about nutrition and you're listening to this, then it can be quite a shell shock, because it's potentially going to be very different foods to what you eat, but also different foods to what you've seen the athlete eat previously. And that can take a bit of an adjustment period. And there was actually a podcast I did with a guest where she described this very well. When you embark on a prep, it could be a week before that. Every Friday night, as my example with the pizza, you sit and have a pizza, you watch a film, you have a glass of wine. A week later, somebody you love and know and care about is in a prep, and they can't do that. They have to say no. And it's a stark contrast. That can be hard for both of you. That can be hard for the athlete, but that can also be hard for the family members, because you feel like you're losing an element of something that you've done habitually over time that you look forward to. Because let's not forget, food is a celebration point, but food is also very connected to every emotion. When you're down, you may want to eat for comfort. When you're happy, you might celebrate by going for a meal, and every emotion in between that. However, in a bodybuilding prep, whether it's a food plan or using the flexible dieting approach, really, generally speaking, for most athletes in this phase, you aren't going to be able to incorporate something like a takeaway pizza. Now, I'll always say it, and I'll say it again. There's different coaches and different approaches to this, for sure. Let's not forget that. But I'm talking about from my personal experience and from my coaching standpoint. So generally speaking, there isn't room to facilitate something like a takeaway during a prep. So that relationship change can be pretty hard. But of course, if that athlete has a strong why and they want to do this, then there has to be a relevance on, okay, so this is for a period of time. Let's look at other ways we can explore potentially creating memories that still include the athlete staying on track. So when I then talk about the change in food and preferences and timings and everything that starts to go on and change, the different macronutrient targets that the athlete has may be something you haven't come across before, and potentially the athlete as well. So calories are made up of macronutrients. So we have protein, carbohydrates, and fats. Now, the coach will generally recommend a target of a protein target in grams, a carbohydrate target in grams, and a fat target in grams. This then equates to a calorie target. So you might have seen a calorie diet or done a calorie diet, or you see it on packets, etc., etc. Now, in a bodybuilding prep, generally speaking, this is then, we're looking at this on a deeper level. There's an emphasis on having more protein and then utilizing carbohydrates and fat throughout this prep phase. But then as the prep goes on, the macronutrient goals will change. Most athletes tend to have the same protein target throughout, and then the carbohydrates and the fats would decrease over the prep. So there is a pretty high emphasis for most coaches, for most bodybuilders, on protein. And protein is aiding recovery, satiety, muscle mass, so retaining muscle mass or promoting muscle gain. And it also helps you feel fuller. Now, of course, as I've spoken about already, you can get to many, many points in prep where you're not feeling full, but it does aid that. So when we then look at a higher protein target than a conventional diet, this means the concoctions of foods may look very different to what you've seen before or eaten before. And you will start to see things like, you know, chicken breast for breakfast with some green beans. I'm going to put that one as an example. You may not, but that's just an example of, if you think about ordinarily in society, right? Breakfast is maybe a bowl of cereal and an orange juice. So for then someone to go from that to having chicken and green beans for breakfast at 6 a.m, then they're off to the gym, it's like, what is this? This is a bit weird. Again, why that sparks potential questions. But, you know, when you're set out your plan or you're deciding your foods, the coach is hopefully educating the athlete as to what sort of foods we want to include. So your fruits and veggies, your protein sources, all of these things, you know, good fat sources. But the guidelines are set out, and it may be that the food plan that's provided is chicken and green beans for breakfast. So it's certainly something to start thinking about, how that does change the dynamic, but also you supporting someone in a prep. How could you maybe think of ideas outside the box to support them during this time that doesn't facilitate them feeling like they have to eat with you to create those memories? So that is, of course, a relevance on the athlete and the family member or friend, you know, going for a coffee instead of all you can eat breakfast. This type of exchange is certainly something to think about. Going for a walk, this type of thing. So hopefully this is giving you that insight into what a prep looks like from an outsider's point of view, particularly someone that's never seen someone do a prep. Maybe someone that is, when someone's incredibly important to you and they embark on this journey, what this could actually mean to them, and how you supporting them rather than pushing back and questioning them will strengthen your relationship. It will help you understand what they're trying to achieve. And I like to think that there's some real nice tools in here to aid that process. And what I want to finish on is what happens after the competition. So when the athlete competes, they've completed the prep. This is if they're doing one show. Of course, there may be multiple shows that they're going to do. But if we take the example of it's the end of their season, so they've done the last show, whether that be one or multiple. Now, this is very, very connected to who the coach is and what their mythologies are around this, how they work with the athlete as an individual. But generally speaking, there is a facilitation of a meal out after the show with family members, with friends. So that meal out, from my personal approach, over time, I've realized that actually going for a nice sit-down meal that's a palatable experience, that is very, very different to my prep foods, creating memories with those that I love, is such a nice feeling. To do your show, whatever the result is, for you to sit down and have a nice time. Now, in the past, there's been elements of wanting to eat a lot of food. there's been elements of a feeling of, well, I can eat everything now, the show is done. But that has also been affected by those around me feeding into that. So this is not me blaming anyone else, but from a personal standpoint, when I reflect, it did not help when people were encouraging me to eat a load of food that I hadn't eaten for 20, 30, 40 weeks, maybe longer. Because when the goal is removed of the show, really, if we take it literally, okay, you can eat what you want to a certain degree. Again, communication with the coach is key. So there is that element of trying to support the athlete in what they decide with their coach, rather than almost cheerleading them to eat more or, buying them a load of stuff. This goes into the prep as well. Buying someone foods that they can't eat in a prep for after the show, it doesn't generally help the mindset, because they've then got to store those foods and the foods are in the house. So actually trying to just let them complete their prep and allowing support and not pressure from foods, and trying to, push them to go out, and when their energy is really low, oh, if you don't come out, it's not fair on me, this type of thing is certainly something to consider. Also, off the back of a show, depending on how the athlete gets on, so whether they win, they place, or they don't place, that is individual to the athlete, how they will react to that. Also the relevance on if they've done a prep before, if they're looking to progress as an athlete, if they've, say as an example, come third, they're looking to come first as a progression. There is a lot of weight on that day, a lot of weight. So after the show, like I say, it's individual, but it can be an emotional roller coaster. And let me tell you, the prep is hard, but sometimes the post-show is harder mentally. Like I say, your goal is removed. Suddenly, you're going to be eating more food. You're not competing again. That ultimate date has gone. You've done it. And then depending on your placing, that can affect how you feel. So I really want to emphasize how important this period is for you to try and have a level of understanding into how the athlete might feel, what their aspirations are from the show. It may be that they want to compete, enjoy the day, and they're feeling really good. However, the next day after the show, they can still feel an emotional dump after that show. And like I say, it's individual, but offering support, letting them cry, letting them shout, letting them do what feels natural, and just being there to just let them sound it out is a very powerful tool for you to offer when someone is in that period of time. The last little bonus tip I'm going to finish on is, if it is a possibility and it's required, if there's a certain point where you as a supporter, as a family member, feels like you potentially need to reach out to the athlete's coach for whatever reason that may be, if they're finding it really, really hard emotionally, if they're not doing good mentally, if they feel like they're going to go off their food plan, if they get injured and they don't tell their coach, anything like that, if it's facilitated, I personally would welcome family members reaching out. I would certainly do that. If it is an option, again, it depends on the coach. That is something you could have in the back of your mind if it was needed during this prep period of time. If you're not able to maybe speak to the athlete and you can see that they really do need help and guidance, and they maybe haven't reached out to their coach fully, this could be something to consider. So I really do hope this episode has been helpful for supporters, but also for athletes to maybe reflect as well and get some pointers. And of course, my Instagram is always open. If anyone would like to send me a message or share this on their story, share this with other athletes, this would really help me get the word out as to how you can get support during your prep, but also how you can communicate with those around you as effectively as possible when embarking on this journey. So thank you for listening. And like I say, I really do hope this episode helps.